So, a very warm welcome to all of you to this afternoon's Fireside Chat, Learning from Innovation Failure, with our guest speaker, Dr. Samuel West, founder and curator at the Museum of Failure. Today's event is part of the Global Innovation Forum's free What's Next webinar series. That's hashtag What's Next, which is about tapping into the knowledge of our community and focusing on opportunities for positive change during the current uncertainty. Many of you may already be familiar with the Global Innovation Forum, which in its 11th year has grown far beyond the boundaries of an annual event into a community of like-minded innovators, many from different backgrounds, industries, market sectors, but united by this common challenge of sharing inspirational perspectives and cross-fertilizing ideas and experiences to solve human challenges and, of course, make the world a better place. The 2021 Virtual Edition Conference will be this September, with talks by the Gates Foundation, Pfizer, LinkedIn, Formula E, Microsoft, and many others. Full details at GIFLondon.com. My name is Ben Strutt. I am Director of Design and Front-End Innovation at Cambridge Design Partnership. We're a global insight research, design, and technology development partner working on both consumer and healthcare products, with offices in Cambridge, UK, and Raleigh on the US East Coast. As we are all painfully aware, we are living through a time of unprecedented change now, and history shows that periods like this often witness significant technology and behavioural shift compressed into very short spaces of time. By definition, when this happens, people will be experimenting, probably failing, and possibly more open to failing than when there is increased pressure to move quickly. It is therefore a pleasure to be hosting someone whose most recent project has placed the emphasis on characterizing the role of failure in the innovation process. Dr. Samuel West is a licensed psychologist, has a PhD in organizational psychology, and his research focuses on creating climates for innovation by encouraging experimentation and exploration. In 2017, he founded the Museum of Failure, showcasing a collection of failed products from around the world. Samuel, a very good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
I love your backdrop.
This background is not by choice, I can say.
Okay. Just show the folks watching just what is
so
going on.
I'd booked a conference room at a library out in the middle of nowhere in rural Sweden, and then it was supposed to be open till 6, and they kicked me out at 4, right as this is supposed to start. So I'm standing outside of the public library, beautiful here, and luckily there's nobody here, but we'll see if somebody walks past to join us.
We came onto the call earlier, and there was someone riding a bike and someone walking their dog in the background.
This is a dynamic background I've got going.
It feels like the future going on, where the 3D virtual background, it's like, mosquitoes.
Flies.
Anyway, the museum has just had its 4th birthday, I think. The exhibition opened in Sweden in June 2017.
Yeah.
Listen, gaining momentum ever since. I mean, there's no small irony that it appears to me, at least, that the Museum of Failure has been an extraordinary success. I mean, before we dive in to explore some of the amazing stories and products, can you take us all back to the beginning and tell us about the original concept and your inspiration and where that all came from?
Yeah, the museum, it's gone so fast. I can't realize it's almost 4 years now, but the museum started, I started working on it sort of mentally a year before we opened, so I didn't have much time to build it. The Museum of Failure was born out of frustration. So my background, in psychology, I had a midlife crisis and did a PhD in organizational science and innovation, with a focus on innovation, and working, despite me being a fantastic innovation consultant, of course, having all the proper hardcore science to back up my methods, I still, with my clients, there was still this obstacle that I couldn't help bridge, and that was that people are still afraid of failing. So despite having fantastic models, my workshops were awesome, it didn't work that well, because at the end of the day, individuals and teams were afraid of failing if they take too bold of a leap, and that's the frustration that led to Museum of Failure.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, you frame it as the fear of failure, and I think we can, probably all relate to that. But is there another bit? I mean, we hear a lot about the kind of success stories. I mean,
Yeah.
what's your view on like all the success? There's so much success, so much success. I mean, is that like a cliche, or was that part of the concept?
Well, that was part of the frustration because, you know, I had this background in clinical psychology, which is all about the dirty, the bad, the ugly, the painful, right? The diseased, the disorders. And then I went into organizational science, and it's all about shiny, happy people being rich and successful and having the best practices all figured out. So for me, I got sick of that. I couldn't stand reading another story of a successful innovator or entrepreneur. I just thought like all these stories are the same, oh, I worked really hard and then I had some challenges I pushed through, and look at me now, I'm a billionaire. Like, all right, I've heard that story before. uh, in fact, Leo Tolstoy, the Russian author, in Anna Karema, he wrote, let's see if I can get this right. He wrote, all happy families are alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in their own special way. And I love that quote. I've changed it for innovation, that, all success stories are alike. They're quite boring. But each failure is endlessly fascinating.
Very, very interesting. No, I completely get that. And I mean, so you started the concept the year before the museum opened. I mean, how many failures did you start with? Was there like a pivotal failure and you thought that's the sort of nugget, and then everything filtered, down from there? Or, when did you think I'm onto something here?
Well, I remember the first product that what happened was, I found it, this is a great idea. I realized I have to do it now. I can't wait. The Swedish Innovation Fund, Vinnova, gave me some money to start out. Without that, I would never have had the time or money to do this. But, the first product that I got isn't that spectacular, but it was important for me because it was the first tangible object I had for the museum. It was a Harley Davidson cologne. Are you familiar with this? Any chance?
No, it doesn't appeal to me particularly, but okay. I can feel the kind of juxtaposition going on between the image and the reality. But tell us the story.
So I mean, Harley Davidson had, their brand is a brand of macho, male macho, the free riding, open road, not afraid of anything. Super macho, obviously. And then they started to extend their brand with new products like this cologne or perfume, for example. They even had Barbie clothes, Christmas ornaments, some other weird stuff that they extended their brand. And initially it worked quite well for Harley Davidson. I mean, they made a lot of money, but, extending the brand that much sort of watered down that sort of macho. It's hard to be macho when Barbie clothes, Christmas ornaments, stuff like that. And this was the first product that I actually had in my hands when I started collecting stuff for the museum. Now, granted, it's not super innovation oriented. This is more brand extension, but yeah, it was important.
Yeah, but no, very interesting. I mean, and it's grown. I mean, how many exhibits do you have? Is it just products? Is it services as well?
Yeah, there's I've really tried to have a diverse sort of mix of items. I could fill an entire museum with smartphones because there's so many failed phones out there. But technology, food, medical equipment, given my health or my medical background, and services. We did an exhibit in Hollywood, and we included failed films.
All right. And I mean, do people send you stuff? I mean, the boxes of kind of cliched junk arrive at your house every day?
Yes, so I have two of them. I have two there. One just arrived a few weeks ago. Max, it's the funny looking. I don't know if it looks like a toothbrush, but it looks like a mouthpiece on the slide deck there.
This looked like an item of torture, this thing. It's somewhere between a DIY product and a...
This is the AMA brush from 2019. Someone said it was a Kickstarter project that got, I can't remember the numbers. I think it was like 7 million euros. Like it was massively funded. And the whole idea, can you tell what it is? It's a toothbrush, of course.
Yes.
Yes. So the idea here, I
thought I was waiting for another smartphone thing.
Yeah.
To come out.
So the thing is, I can't keep a straight face when I tell this story. So the idea here is like we're all tired of brushing our teeth. You know, you have to stand, even if you have an electric toothbrush, you have to stand there a while, right, and brush your teeth. It's boring. So who wouldn't want to the 10-second toothbrush? So the idea here is you stick it in your mouth, hold the button for 10 seconds, and it cleans your teeth all at once. Who
wouldn't want that?
I can see your excitement, Ben. You really want this.
Effervescent with excitement. Yeah. No, I was going to ask what's the weirdest thing you've ever had, but I think we've just arrived there.
No. This is not the weirdest. And the problem with it, the reason it's in the Museum of Failure is that it doesn't work. So you can stick it in your mouth for 10 seconds, 10 minutes, or 10 months. It still won't clean your teeth. Which kind of makes it a failure as far as a toothbrush goes, right?
Right.
So this was one that was donated a few weeks ago, and the man who bought it said, I was so angry and disappointed with the product even before it arrived. So he sent it to me unopened. It still had the plastic on the box.
Someone in the chat's just said that they think those brushes are still advertised on TV, so maybe they're helping to try and recoup all that investment money from the start. Maybe.
I have another one. This one I got an email yesterday from Germany, and I haven't done the research on this. I don't know if this is actually a failure or what it is, but there's a McDonald's shower gel.
Is that after you spill your ketchup?
I don't know what the design, what the purpose is, but it's a shower gel where it's called McFlurry shower gel. So it smells like chocolate.
Has it got bits in it?
I don't know, but I said, please send it to me.
Well, maybe have a snack. Anyway, whatever. It's it sounds like an interesting case study.
Yeah, no research done, so I can't answer any questions.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, do things arrive and you kind of like, is that a failure or is that a success? I mean, you know, the things kind of sit on that fence, and you think, well, there's a failure or a learning story in there, but ultimately it was a success. Yeah.
I mean, the criteria to be in the museum is that the whether it's a product, a service, whatever, ideology even, it has to be an innovation in some way. And that's kind of the difficult one. So not everything is an innovation that just, that fails, but it has to be where the initiative was, there was expectations that it would make money or make people's lives better in some way. And then it has to be a failure, of course. And failure is also sort of difficult because something can be a failure today, but then not tomorrow. Or something can be a failure for the target group and then not for another. The Segway is a good example of this. The Segway has a definite home, a pedestal at the Museum of Failure. It was all the expectations for the Segway of revolutionizing the way people transport themselves and being bigger than the internet. There's a quote. 2001, people thought this. The expectations were high, and the Segway failed on all of them. So it's in the Museum of Failure. But I've gotten a response and quite a few emails from disabled people who with mobility issues who said, "Hey, I know that the Segway is in your museum, and I'm not going to argue, but for me and other people with mobility problems, the Segway is a game changer and still is." So it's a failure as a product to make a profit for the company that designed it, but it's not a failure for those people who get great use from it.
So that's super interesting because the way you just articulated it feels like context is a really important part of it. And I
Absolutely.
Wonder, if maybe we should explore this baseline concept a little bit, like how do we, or how should we define failure, versus success? And I mean, I'm thinking, it's not exactly a concept that sits very well in the traditional education system or even society. Like, hey kids, I'm really hoping that your report at the end of term is full of experimental failure. I mean, how should we define it?
I like the nerdy or sort of scientific definition of failure from the organizational literature. It's that failure is a deviation from expected or desired outcomes. So then it doesn't matter if you're designing a new product, a new technology, service, or even if you're into charity work and you're designing a new campaign. If you don't achieve, if the effort you put in doesn't achieve what you wanted, then it's a failure. And that's, like you said, it's contextual completely.
Yeah, and I guess a corporate would judge, failure at the end of an innovation investment, maybe differently to an individual. I'm sure there's a sort of perspective related nuance, something like success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm, and that feels like a very personal sort of way of looking at it versus maybe more of a commercial or corporate way of looking at it. I think having listened to you talk a little bit, the other thing that I've picked up is you wanting to reimagine not just how we interpret and talk about failure, but also the other aspects of the museum concept, which is kind of the art of storytelling as well. Is there something you could expand on there?
I with the museum instead. So what people do, individuals and corporate and companies do alike, is when they fail, it's shameful. The pain of failure is that social judgment, evaluation, negative evaluation from others, and that hurts. Period. Whether you're a company or an individual. And so our sort of automatic response is to avoid these situations, and if they happen, you sweep them under the carpet, right? So you try to pretend like that failure never happened. Now the companies, they have big PR and marketing departments who are very good at turning the failure into, oh, it was challenges we have yet to overcome. They can cover it with corporate bullshit to make it go away. Now the Museum of Failure takes these failed innovations and puts them up on a pedestal and shines a spotlight on them. And like you said, to tell the story, because the stories behind each one of these failed innovations is fascinating. And there are certain sort of general themes, but they're more unique than there are sort of themes going on at the museum.
Oh, no, I mean, that's super cool. It reminds me, actually, I went to a conference a few years ago, and one of the speakers was he was recounting a story from when he was in I think it was a big consumer electronics company, and he'd been leading this project, and he was super enthusiastic and young and full of ideas and driving this thing, and several $1 million down, I think the project kind of dive bombed, and he was summoned to the R&D VP's office, and thought, that's it, I'm out of here. And apparently the VP turned around and said, so what did you learn? And that was a revelation to him, because it wasn't a case of, well, off you go. It was, the guy wanted to know that there was something that he could take forward and reapply. And I guess that's where we're at.
And this is, so the sort of aim of the museum is, one, to communicate that we need to accept failure if we want innovation, or if we want any kind of progress for that matter. Number two is that learning. So if you're not willing to discuss your failure or your team's or your company's failure, how are you going to learn from that failure? I mean, you have to be able to accept that initial discomfort of talking about the failure if you want to learn from it. And then that's what I think where most teams and even us in our private lives get it wrong, is that we avoid that sort of emotional pain and, hey, talk about something more fun instead, look, our new product we're having in the pipeline, rather than trying to glean some learnings from the failures that have happened.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like there's been, let's say, an industry shift. I mean, MBA courses now talk about, the Kodak case study, inventing digital photography and putting it in the cupboard in case it undermined their main business model. And, even Apple, for all its incredible success,
Absolutely.
tried to get the tablet off the ground probably, two decades. I think the
Yeah.
Newton project was 2 decades before the first iPad appeared in the shop. And maybe that, my question there is, have you started to see, let's say, clusters of failure themes emerge? Is it timing? Is it technology? Is it execution? Or maybe back to your other point, there's just so many different stories. Are there themes, or is it just very dispersed?
I get this question quite frequently, and I wish I had a great answer to it, where I could say, yeah, here are the 7 themes, and you should buy my new book. But I don't. There are some themes at the museum. One of them, if you mentioned Apple, they, despite being massively successful, they have a lot of innovation failures. And the two that are in the museum that I can think of now is, of course, the Apple Newton and 93, I think it was, and Apple Maps, which was 2012, if I'm not 13 or so. Both of those products were launched prematurely. So Apple launched it with the engineers at Apple knowing that it's premature, it doesn't work. So that's a theme you see on the technology side, where often things are launched and they say, we'll fix it later, but we have to be first to market. That's one theme. Another theme that's I think is interesting, but I don't get much interest for it, is when products and services are overhyped. So there's quite a few items at the museum that have gone viral, either in modern history or 50 years. The Ford Edsel,
yeah,
biggest automotive failure ever.
Yeah.
One of the main reasons it failed is because it was overhyped. I mean, sure, we didn't have TikTok and Instagram, sure, but Frank Sinatra had a entertainment evening show on TV promoting the Edsel. I mean, how much more hype do you need?
Yeah. If anyone watching isn't familiar with the Ford Edsel, don't do a Google now. Do a Google later. But it's a phenomenal thing. It's like something from the Jetsons mixed with I don't know what. And I think that the story is that they kind of developed it by focus group, almost like component by component. Would you like these wheels and this fender and this steering wheel? And everyone went, yeah. But as a designer and a researcher, you can't just stick everything in the big tombola and mix it up and put glue in and it just doesn't work, right?
It's a fantastic example of innovation failure that, although it was 1958, I think the year was, the story is still valid today.
Right. And I'm interested, and there's a question come on the chat about this, is when massively successful companies like Apple succeed but have failure as part of that story, it's kind of reassuring to us mere mortals, but I guess the question is, maybe you could reflect on how folks working in corporate can be encouraged to embrace failure, to use it as part of the process, to evangelize that understanding of it being almost a critical part of pushing the boundaries.
Absolutely. I mean, one sort of initial prerequisite for any discussion about failure in the corporate world is that we need to understand the difference between bad and good failure, because and I feel sometimes like I can't dumb this down anymore. There is good failure and there's bad failure, and the Museum of Failure and all our discussion here about the role of failure for innovation. This is all focused on the good failure. The bad failure is failure that's done because of sloppiness, incompetence, just deviance in some way, where people don't follow the checklist, right? So that type of failure is not the failure that the Museum of Failure, that's not what this discussion is about. That type of failure should not ever be accepted or promoted within an organization. And then you have failure, sort of the middle ground is failure that's because of complexity. So massive IT systems, logistics systems, etc. They're just so complex that there's bound to be failure in there, no matter what you do to mitigate that. And then the good failure, the failure that's done for progress, that's done for innovation, where you're testing new, methods, new ways of thinking, etc., etc. So I think that's important, and I find myself when I give talks for corporate events, I find myself going back to that sort of basic thing. We have to start treating failure differently. Like, it's not all bad.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I kind of think of maybe using that analogy of good failure and bad failure. It's like forming a hypothesis or setting up an experiment that just will not work. It won't work. Or something that might work, and here's why, or an MVP that might work. And and I think we're all looking for more agile innovation methodologies, moving faster, working with consumers. And it's okay to develop a bunch of hypotheses and kind of throw them out there and see what sticks, whether that's a transactional learning experiment or
exactly
whatever. Okay,
cool. There's another, you asked how to encourage taking meaningful risks. I mean, the best way, if people further up in the hierarchy, if senior management if they are willing to accept and discuss and learn from their failures, it'll trickle down very quickly. But I did a talk a couple of years ago, and I had lunch with the CEO afterwards, and very hierarchical organization. And then he said, matter of fact, he said, all your talk, I hired you for this, but all your talk about failure and acceptance, it's all good for my employees, but not for me. Right. And I was like, you're gonna need more than a talk from me to get anything to change here.
Yeah, I like this. I mean, we hear a lot about innovation culture, though, and I guess culture of failure. And I get there's a sort of question or comment in the chat again about how important it is to have management to buy in, right from the very top of the boardroom, buy into pushing the boundaries and the acceptance that there is going to be some failure, some attrition along the way.
I mean, I get sometimes I get stop me off if this is way too far off, but like, if you think about life, I mean, the fact that we exist here today, it's because of billions of years and trillion zillions of mutations, of failures, right? And that's why we're here. And we tend to forget that a lot of the things, or I would say everything we take for granted, has a huge history of failures, of iterations and attempts before it got the way it is. And we forget that all we see is the shiny end product, the packaged perfection, and we don't see. Yeah.
No, that feels way too philosophical.
Oh, sorry. I'll stop.
Conversation about McFlurry shampoo, but no, I love that. I mean, it's interesting. We mentioned the Newton or the MessagePad, and I think it reminds me that that came out of one of the most important companies of modern times that most people have never heard of, and it's been featured in the GIF series before, General Magic. I mean, literally, again, if you're not familiar with General Magic, incredible company, and this incredible film actually, which aired I think in 2019, and literally, and I'm not over-egging this, if it hadn't been for this company and some of the people that came out of it, I mean, Tony Fadell, Megan Smith, Joanna Hoffman, Andy Hertzfeld, the world probably almost wouldn't look like what it looks like now. I mean, smartphone and all that stuff, and yet the company failed, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
completely
extraordinary. Great film, General Magic. Look it up. So listen, this webinar, this series is about reflecting on the period we're living through. The pandemic. I mean, no business, no individual has been kind of immune from it, and I guess experiences have been very different in business and personally. How has it impacted the museum? How have you responded to the challenges? What have you learned?
I've learned don't rely on a museum and international speaking gigs as your source of income if there's a pandemic. That's the main lesson I've learned.
I'll send a memo next time.
Yeah, do that. I mean, what's been good for the museum and for me is that it's given me time to develop the museum. So, I mean, before the pandemic, it was just too much going on. So, for example, a good sized portion of the museum is now available online on the website. That's an example of something that would never have happened if it wasn't for the pandemic. And I'm working on developing the museum to include sort of new, I won't say too much now, but new sort of sections and specific focus areas within failure. And even trying to incorporate things that are a little bit more difficult. So ideological failure is kind of difficult. It's non-tangible. Right now, I'm working on an exhibit for the Fire Festival.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that?
That is all about it.
I just started looking into it, but I mean, there's two documentaries, one on Netflix and one on HBO. It was a music festival for upper class, cool, I guess Americans, I guess international jet setters, and they sold it with bikini models and white beaches and stuff, and it was supposed to be awesome. Got a bunch of money and sold tickets, and it turned out that the Fire Festival, it was just a complete catastrophe in every single way. And the documentaries on Netflix and HBO illustrate that very in an entertaining way. But so the exhibit for the Museum of Failure will be this luxury festival, right, with luxury food and caviar and private jets and stuff. The lunch that the few poor souls who made it to that island in the Bahamas, it was a styrofoam. It looked like a horrible prison food from somewhere horrible. So I'm trying to recreate that with plastic fake food.
Yeah, as you were talking, I've been going back to your own, I guess, learning experience. You said it tongue in cheek, but you had a twinkle in your eye, and I think it's quite inspirational when people talk about the concept of failure, but kind of in a very reflective way, and I guess showing a sense of vulnerability. And back to our point about the boardroom needing to show that empathy, that sensitivity, that vulnerability, and that acceptance. It feels really important, and it's. I'm a big fan of the Sir Ken Robinson school of thought. Teaching kids to be creative rather than conventional subjects and methods in school, because that creative mindset sets a culture that's going to enable them, frankly, to pivot, deal with whatever life throws at them. And I quite like this idea of building in contingency or resilience. And you're an organizational psychologist. Could you talk more about this concept of resilience, maybe as individuals, but also how that translates to organizations, whether that's big corp multinationals or whether it's other organizations, whatever that organization is, be it a charity or a whatever else?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sort of elements I'd like to emphasize. One is business managers, business people are taught to minimize risk and avoid failure, right? And even technology from that perspective as well. But a lot of companies are really good at avoiding failure and minimizing risk, but they're not any good at failure recovery, right? So if you're used to failing, if you're used to formulating bold hypotheses and testing them and seeing them fail, then you're probably pretty good at recovering from those failures. And so what we're seeing now in the pandemic as well is companies that are like, oh no, we've never had to deal with any kind of hardships before because our products always sell. They find themselves, not knowing what to do next. Whereas companies that have this built into their corporate DNA are much better at sort of recovering from when things don't go as expected. So failure recovery is much more important than failure avoidance when it comes to innovation, I would say. Number two, and this, you told me not to get too philosophical and stuff.
No, I'm kidding, please.
Hey, you're asking a nerd, so you're going to get a nerd answer here. Psychological safety. I mean, it's my favorite concept within organizational psychology, and it's a concept Amy Edmondson is the person you want to Google if you want to find out more information about psychological safety. But it's fairly simple. It's the sense of safety within a team where you can be vulnerable, not just when it comes to failure, but in general, and ask those stupid questions or be critical when you feel critical.
Yeah, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because that has to come from a cultural perspective. You have to
Totally,
develop that culture,
totally.
because you know, the flip side of that idea of safety is, I guess, I mean, you know, I'm not a psychologist, but is more the kind of pattern recognition where you pull in, you revert to type, you know, nobody gets fired for hiring the, you know, big shiny consulting team, whatever, you know. So actually, to create that safe space has to be cultural.
It's totally cultural, and it's something that it's too easy to describe. So, but it's really difficult to achieve, because the most powerful way to achieve psychological safety is when the team members, and especially the team leader or senior management, demonstrates psychological safety, is vulnerable, is you know, allows themselves to ask the question that nobody dares to ask, and the safety comes from that sense of, you know, you won't be punished for it within that context of that team. Right. And it's beautiful. I've worked with teams, mostly it's from the medical field, but teams with very low psychological safety, but all the money in the world, and sort of prestigious leaders. It was horrible, versus working in a team where there's a safety within that team where everybody can contribute without fear of being punished for it.
And I think, I mean, we certainly, within our creative culture at CDP, it's very much an in the room, very, you know, dare I say it, sort of physical type relationship, you know, being in the room, bouncing off people, ideas, you know, that's the classic, you know, creative brainstorming thing. And, you know, digital has introduced new challenges, and, you know, we've forged ways now where we're routinely delivering, you know, global virtual workshops and brainstorms and so on. And so that's, I guess, forced us to pivot. But maybe you could sort of talk a bit more about this kind of digital relationship thing, because I think most people probably find that it is harder to create those very empathetic bonds. And I know there was somebody did a really interesting piece of research that I think emerged 6 or 9 months ago, where they'd done they charted the outcome of a call against its objective based on whether there were the pleasantries that if you'd gone into a physical meeting at the start and, you know, shaken hands and had a cup of tea and talked about the weather and then got down to business, versus the virtual meeting, which starts at 9. It's very transactional. You know, good afternoon,
and
Sam.
It ends when I click this button right here.
And actually, there was an incredible divergence. I mean, a significant difference in the success of the outcome of the meeting. So, are there any sort of thoughts or tips that you could give on how those watching can build that more empathetic, less, let's say, direct transactional culture through digital relationships?
I don't know if you're going to like this answer, but I like to steal knowledge from one field and apply it totally non-empirically in another field. So from relationship counseling and from marriage counseling, there's a large body of research that shows like how many positive interactions there needs to be between a couple in order for that relationship to survive. How many positive interactions per negative do you think?
Oh, I don't know. It's going to be at least 5.
7.
Okay.
So you're not that far off.
Okay.
And the research on teams show that you're not married to the people you work with or the people you have meetings with, but there should be an even higher ratio. So 1 to like 20, 1 to 18. So those positive interactions, hey Ben, I like your totally white background there. I don't, but it could have been a compliment.
I'm going to tell you a story about my white background in a minute.
But so those positive interactions create that that social fabric that we need.
So let's flip that just for a second, because if we have to reinforce so much positive digitally, and yet we've just spent quite a lot of time talking about the importance of, you know, letting it all out, warts and all of the problems. I'm sorry that this really failed. This went wrong, but you're really smart, and I like the shirt you're wearing, and great haircut. And how do we align those things?
Well,
Or is it like the culture?
then I don't. Okay, when talking about specifically about innovation failure and that psychological safety that we need within the teams or within an organization to be able to have productive conversations about the failures and learn from them. I mean, that needs that sort of that safety within a group, and you don't get that kind of safety within the group without having those positive interactions. But let's not underestimate the value of the negative evaluation also. If you only people like this that only praise you, only give positive reinforcement, they're not credible. You need to throw in some kind of like honest critical feedback every now and then to be credible as well. And I think that's what we're looking for in these conversations about failure as well. That when I talk about failure, I love I can't talk about it without finding a lot of these stories extremely funny. So the humor element is positive, but we're talking about failures that cost millions and millions of dollars and probably cost people their careers in many cases as well. So I think that mix is the sweet spot, not entirely positive, not entirely negative.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I was a Dyson design engineer for 5 years, and I was kind of shaped by this mantra of, 15 years and 5,127 prototypes to optimize the first bagless vacuum cleaner. And I think, Amazon has 14 leadership principles, which, several of them actually focus on, trying stuff and taking responsibility and getting on with things and so on. How do we fold that stuff back into, I guess, the failure culture? Because there's a lot of focus on mental health at the moment. How do we speak about vulnerability and psychological safety and yet keep moving the dial forwards? How do we find a place where we kind of bring these two worlds together?
I don't see them. I don't see the clash. I mean, a strong person is a vulnerable person as well. I don't think there can be strength without that vulnerability, and I don't think there will ever be innovation without failure. So I don't see it as being polarized because they both need each other. Unfortunately, and the reason the Museum of Failure exists is because we are obsessed with the happiness and the success side of things, and the failure doesn't get as much attention. Vulnerability doesn't get as much attention as power, strength, determination, grit. That's the latest thing. Oh, you gotta have grit. Like, where's the empathy? Where's the vulnerability? Where's that? It's not part of the conversation. And that's part of the reason I started the museum, because the success and the powerful and all this, they get plenty of attention. It's on the front page of every magazine, and anywhere you look, they're shiny, happy people. But the reality is that that's not life. The reality of life is that there is pain, suffering, and when it comes to innovation, there's plenty of failure, and it doesn't get the attention it deserves. And there's a stigma as well. I mean, which is absurd, that people who are taking meaningful risks get penalized by society or by their employer, when in fact it should be the opposite.
So we've talked about kind of at an individual level, we've talked about at a corporate culture level. I mean, actually stepping up to, another level again. I mean, have you noticed global or maybe regional differences in attitudes, or even periods in history where there's been like an ebb and flow in the cultural attitude towards innovation and failure? I mean, are these things cyclical? I mean, there's nations that seem to have been at the top of their game through time. And I mean, somewhere like Japan is synonymous with innovation through the ages. I mean, I think there's something like 12 different zones of steel on a samurai sword. And the first Walkman was created because Sony co-founder, wanted to listen to music on a flight, and was released in, I think, 1979 or something. And motorcycles. I mean, so yeah, white background. So I was hoping to broadcast from my garage today, so the case study could be in the room. But I had some Wi-Fi issues this morning and kind of threw that idea about 2 hours ago and pivoted. So I'm in the office now. Sorry, guys. But what I was trying to demonstrate, yeah, boo hiss. But I was trying to demonstrate that the innovation metaphor can actually be flipped on its head. So one of my favorite sort of innovation failure flips to success metaphors was, imagine there's a Suzuki GSXR 1000 in the background now, something of a legend in motorcycle terms, and this was the original one. So this lineage of motorcycle is amazing. Now, you don't have to be a motorcycle fan to get the story. So this was launched in 1985, and it was the brainchild of a project leader called Yokuchi, who rewrote the sports bike rulebook, and he was all about pushing tech boundaries and was convinced that Japanese engineers were basically being way too conservative. And long story short, there was a voluntary race restriction at the time, 100 brake horsepower. So he figured that if he could make it lighter, he could be more competitive. And so on day one of the project, he basically had all the engineers strip the entire latest spec bike at the time, every nut and bolt, lay them out on the floor, and then he told them to paint any parts that hadn't failed in the field blue, and any parts that had failed in the field red. And when they were all laid out on the floor, as you can imagine, almost all of them were blue. And he basically turned around to his engineers and said, "Of course, we're not failing enough. There isn't enough red. We can save more weight." And the rest is history. And this was a real revolutionary moment in history. And I was pondering if this incredibly bold approach was way off kind of the cultural grid, or actually I was thinking then about Kaizen and this idea of kind of this philosophy of good change, and rather than punishing employees for mistakes, you kind of empower them to improve things through this continuous improvement over time. And the thing I love about Kaizen, I think it's a philosophy rather than a system, which makes it flexible and adaptable. Although, to be fair, that was probably like big adaptation day in the office. But now listen, motorbikes, you've got a motorcycle in the museum. Tell us about it.
Come on, Max, put on the Honda.
It's a good one. It's a
a great one. It's a Honda Pacific Coast. I think it's the P800 is the name of it. Pacific Coast 800. It failed not once but twice, which makes it even more interesting. It's a super powerful, awesome, comfortable motorcycle made for people who do not like motorcycles. So we have one at the museum. I found it by accident. I was buying a Segway up in the mountains outside of Los Angeles, and the guy's like, "What do you want it for?" And I told him about. He's like, "I have a motorcycle for you," and this is it. So the whole idea is Honda did everything to make it not feel like a motorcycle. So it's completely encased with plastic, and the dashboard looks like a Honda Accord, not like a motorcycle. It's got plenty of room for luggage. It's quite silent, and it's made for the yuppie who, the lawyer who drives from the suburbs into the city and doesn't want to get stuck in traffic.
I think the jokes about this were really cruel. I think it was literally, Honda Accord with 2 wheels. And I think that the best one I heard was Born to be Mild, because it's like a towing machine.
No, the best one I read in the article you sent me was, it looks like a motorcycle mixed with a porta potty.
Right. Okay. Perfect. No, I mean, listen, I don't want to dwell on motorcycles because not everyone on the call is going to be into motorcycles. But I mean, the museum is full of these incredible products and services. I mean, you mentioned the Ford Edsel earlier on. I mean, give us a few others. Google Glass.
Max, can we go to the water kettle first? Can I have 2 examples then, Ben? Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Come on, Max, show us the water. It's above the Pringles.
Disposable DVD feels like another amazing.
So anyway, if Ben can show us this photo, Max, I mean, there we go. Thank you. So this is a water kettle by Philip Stark, and the producer Alessi in Italy wrote that it's my most beautiful mistake. So it's a water kettle where design has triumphed function. So you can't see how much water is in it, and when you try to use it, if you pour water into your teacup, it scalds your face with a hot cloud of steam. It's a beautiful example of innovation failure. Go take the next slide, please, Max. The Pringles. Can we end with this one?
Yeah, I don't know where
it's a funny one. Okay, next slide, just. Yeah. Any of the Pringles, never mind. Anyway, so Pringles.
Tell us the Pringles story.
Yeah, so Procter and Gamble, back in '96, they developed a calorie-free fat substitute, and it it was the holy grail of food science. You could eat all the junk food you wanted without getting fat, which is hallelujah. Huge expectations. I remember my parents in California were so excited about this. The only problem was, Max, if you can just go to the next image on the slide deck, is that it had horrific side effects. If you ate a little bit too much of these potato chips, you would call them crisps, right? Then it caused explosive diarrhea. And what's so funny about this is, it's funny because it says a lot about us as humans, but Procter and Gamble, they're not noobs when it comes to new product development. They know what they're doing, but even they can get it wrong. But once it became associated with diarrhea, the corporate PR and marketing teams said we have to relabel, we have to rebrand diarrhea, because it doesn't have a nice ring to it when you associate it with food. So they relabeled diarrhea as anal leakage.
I feel I'm gonna have to lift the conversation back.
Well,
the perfect weight loss product, I guess, but we shouldn't laugh. There's a question that came in. There's some examples of services. We talked about products quite a lot. Services have gone wrong, and one of the things that I was looking at some of the products in the museum. I was amazed how many smartphones or predecessors of smartphones that were hardware that ultimately became an app, or I guess a service in that regard. But I mean, do you want to comment on a couple that nearly made it but didn't quite, because then the smartphone happened and it was a timing thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole range of products that failed, not because they were bad, but they were launched just as the iPhone was launched. One of them I can think of is a DJ, sort of a mixer table that the Swedish company invested a lot of money into making this portable DJ device. And there's more people than me that don't know that the library is closed. And it was a beautiful piece of technology. I mean, it was a beautiful device, but it was launched at the same time as the iPhone, which you could just download a DJ mixer app. Sorry, this has nothing to do with services. This is just a great story there on the Roland. But yeah, no, where was I? The DJ app. So it was beautiful. Everything was great, except the iPhone came and it sort of made their newly developed product completely obsolete. But what they did is they recovered from that and launched an app based on their device, and sort of salvaged what they could from that idea. But when it comes to services, I mean, there's a lot of services that are failures, because I mean, it's more difficult for us at the museum to display services. We have to get creative in how we display them.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I just wanted to maybe pivot, because there's another case study that I remembered, and that's, I think, in the museum, you've got a wall of Oreos flavors.
Yeah.
And I was super intrigued about why, because my instinct was, and I don't know the case study, but my instinct was looking at that, hey, they've been super experimental. It's almost like a live learning experiment. Stick some stuff out there, make it regional, see what literally sticks, what people like, what they don't like. So why did that one end up in the museum?
The question is, why is there Oreos in the Museum of Failure? It's definitely not because they're afraid of launching new flavors, because the wall of Oreos, I think there's like 30 flavors, 25 flavors there. And the whole point of that is to show how the manufacturers of Oreos actually have this evolutionary approach to innovation. They launch all these crazy flavors, and then 1 out of 10 might be good enough to stick and stay. That's only the partial truth. The reality is they also use this launching a new flavor of wasabi mustard flavored Oreos is also a gimmick to get people to share on social media. So it's not entirely true that it's only for innovation purposes.
Yeah,
I just want to say, when we opened in China, the organizer in Shanghai had done a brilliant job with the wall of Oreos, and they brought me 2 flavors I'd never tried. One was wasabi flavor Oreo, and the other one was barbecue chicken flavor Oreo.
Both sound pretty special. Yeah.
Yummy. There it is.
I mean, and interesting. I mean, that sort of brings us back to a question we had on the chat, which is how do you connect or relate the ability of testing and prototyping with failure? And I think, right at the start, we were talking about actually how do you define success or failure? And like, maybe to your point about wasabi flavored Oreos, maybe you only shift X number of units, but actually maybe the PR campaign was enough to justify that launch. So maybe it comes again to this context of did you meet what your objective was? And if it was marketing success, not necessarily product sellout, job done, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, Samuel, somehow we've whipped through the best part of an hour, and I mean, that's super frustrating for me. I mean, listen, as the world opens up again, hopefully, I mean, I'd be surprised if anyone watching isn't gagging to get to one of your exhibitions. Tell us about locations, format, fixed, touring, mini pop-ups.
We've got right now there's a design exhibit in Saint-Étienne in France at the Design Museum. There's a small, tiny exhibit at the Sweden House, the Swedish Embassy in Washington, D.C. And a big show is opening, the largest one ever is opening in Taiwan in December. They just got hit with COVID now themselves, so it's been delayed till December. And then we have the Bay Area in Northern California also this fall. I don't have the exact dates. So San Francisco, Taiwan, Saint-Étienne.
Amazing.
And then if you want to help me make money, because I didn't make anything last year, then order the talk or the pop-up museum, which is a miniature version of the museum that larger events hire for a day or 3 to make something interesting for their participants to enjoy.
Amazing. And big question, what next?
What next? I just launched a 3rd museum. It's a museum of activism. So it's activist movements, activism all around the globe. It's becoming more and more important, and there's so much background noise everywhere, media-wise, that they deserve a space, and they deserve to get some proper attention. And what we've done is, instead of just describing what the activist movements are, we actually show how it's done, which is more difficult to grasp. How did Belarus start their revolution? What's going on in Myanmar? What's going on with Black Lives Matter, etc. It's for me, it's a completely new field, and I think it's extremely exciting to work with.
Amazing. All about the stories again.
Again, it's all about stories.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am sorry to say our hour with Samuel is up. Samuel, thank you for sharing such inspirational insight and the funny side, as well as some of the serious lessons.
And I'm glad that the library in rural Sweden was kind. The internet worked, so
you didn't get any cyclists going round in circles.
Yeah.
That's correct. No, seriously, a huge thank you for joining us today. In the face of adversity, pivoting, of course. And of course, thank you to our audience. Thank you for joining us from so many different parts of the world. If you joined the webinar late or would like to enjoy Samuel's discussion again at a later date, a recording will be available very shortly on the Global Innovation Forum YouTube channel. Please don't forget to sign up for this year's conference themed Reimagine the Future, taking place this September. Stay well, and remember, of course, the only real failure is a mistake from which we learn nothing. Good day to you.